And since you're all from Minnesota, go ahead, turn. Okay, we're going to be talking about the forgotten capitals, but before we do that, we're going to talk about your first governor. Well, most people don't realize it, that part of Minnesota, a large part of Minnesota, was part of the Northwest Territory. And it just so happens that Minneapolis, St. Paul, was part of that Northwest Territory. The Northwest Territory was set aside by not the current Constitution, Congress, you know, the United States Senate, the United States House, the United States President, and the Supreme Court, that government that creates the United States. It was actually put together by the government before it in 1787. And it was called, the government was called the United States in Congress Assembled, or the long is United States of America in Congress Assembled. So instead of having the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the President rolled up into the United States of America, we just had this one body called the United States in Congress Assembled. And they had a president, and his name was President of the United States in Congress Assembled, President of Congress, he used sometimes, which was a shortened form, on very important matters like the Treaty of Paris's ratification. He would be President of the United States of America, and he would also be His Excellency sometimes. And the reason is because at one time he would be in a chamber like this, 13 states represented. He's one of the states. Your former governor was one of those presidents, so he's one of those states, and he has a vote. 13 states, 13 votes, I have a vote. He also received all the mail into the United States government. He also decided what we were going to answer, what we were going to bring before Congress. He also decided, is your bill coming up? Is your matter coming up? They only had 8 states. That was it, 8 states. Sometimes even 7, because 7 made a quorum. So the man was sitting up there with 1/8, 1/7, 1/9, 1/10, 1/12, or 1/13 of all the votes needed to enact legislation. And one of the most important pieces of legislation ever enacted, according to Daniel Webster, was the Northwest Ordinance, which basically created the mechanism for creating states. Once a population reached a certain amount of people, and in the original ordinance it said 60,000 people, those states could petition the government, and the Congress would have to vote yes or no on statehood. And they would come in equally to Virginia or New York. And this was a big deal, because at that time when they passed it, one state, one vote. So Delaware had the same vote as Virginia, and it was a big debate, but this is how they passed it, coming equally. The second thing the Northwest Ordinance did is, you know how you guys have sections and townships instead of meet and bounds here? Well, that's how it was designed. It was designed in the Northwest Ordinance. Went all the way out to as far west as Oregon, Alaska. It was all set up that way. The other thing that they passed is they gave land away to colleges and universities, land grant colleges, Northwest Ordinance. But finally, one of the most important things was, and there were many other items in there, is it made the territory free of slavery. So, if you crossed the Ohio River in Virginia, and you wanted to settle in Ohio, or you wanted to go to Indiana, or you wanted to come all the way out to Minnesota, you had to free your slaves. It was free from slavery. And as part of our exhibit, we have a slave emancipation document right next to this president of the United States who got this passed in July of 1787 with only 8 states. The other thing your governor did was, when he came to office on February 2nd, 1787, the nation was falling apart. It was just in shambles. Shays' Rebellion was going on in Massachusetts, the previous president's home state, and they didn't have the money to pay the troops to put it down. They couldn't pay their bills. He was elected on February 2nd, 1787, and the first thing he did in February was he issued a resolution with his Congress to call for a revision, and this is important, a revision of the federal Constitution. The words were used, federal Constitution. And of course that turned into the Philadelphia Convention, which we all know today as the Constitutional Convention. So when he did that, he was President of the United States in Congress assembled. When he did a treaty, he was President of the United States of America. When he issued a decision on a border war between New York and Pennsylvania, who gets the land or who has the rights to the Chesapeake, or a treason trial, now he was His Excellency, more or less, like the Chief Justice, because they had to make the decision. What am I? Am I a President of Congress? Am I a President of the United States? Am I Chief Justice? Well, the answer is he was all three. So, Northwest Ordinance is over, it's done. What comes next, which is really cool, is the new Constitution, right? George Washington was the President. James Madison was there, Ben Franklin there, and these great men send a new Constitution to this President and to Congress. And Richard Henry Lee was there too, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and a former President of the United States. And this President got it, who was a Major General, and a friend of George Washington, and there was a problem with it. They didn't revise the federal Constitution, they threw it out. They kept about 5% of it. That's it. Not much of it at all. And in that Constitution, they said no foreign-born U.S. presidents. None. He was born in Scotland. He's our only foreign-born U.S. president. He got under there. So, what did he do? He decided that he was just going to not change a word of it or a paragraph. He was not going to get rid of it like it was up to them they could do and send it on to the states. But Richard Henry Lee wanted to get rid of it. He thought it was going to create a federal government so huge and so powerful that the president, who would be there for 16 years, you've got to remember Congress only served for 1 year, Congress did, and so did its president. Every year they elected a new Congress, you can imagine. Every year a new president. And he says, oh, 16 years for a president, 6 years for a senator, 2 years for Congress, but they're checked by the Senate, Supreme Court for life. This guy says we're going to create princes and we're going to create lords, and it's going to be like, oh, a big, giant, kingdom again. And he didn't want it. He didn't even want to bring the Constitution to the states. He didn't think the states would ratify it. So he was championing things like the Bill of Rights and lower terms. So there was a big battle that went on in the United States, and Congress assembled. A group that wanted to change it or get rid of it, and a group that wanted to send it on. And the group that wanted to send it on, led by this president, won out. And off it went to the states. His term was up, and they made him the governor of the Northwest Territory, which includes St. Paul and Minneapolis. So everybody knows who this man is, the Northwest Ordinance, and he passed probably the most important piece of legislation in the history of, definitely the history of our country. Some people might say one of the most important pieces in the world, our U.S. Constitution that we thrive under for 233 years. So everybody, tell me who your first governor is from Minnesota. 1, 2, 3, tell me. I heard it. Arthur St. Clair. Arthur St. Clair. And we have a document of him over there. We have a beautiful oil painting of him over there. It's all for you to see, okay? But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about